So we're back and the diffusion pump has warmed up. We can now begin to worry about pumping down the whole vacuum line. So that if you were looking at your valves, this one's open, this one's closed, this one's closed, this one's closed, this one's open right now. So from here through the trap to the manifold is wide open. You can't read it, but it says there are about 536 millitorr, 0.5 torr of gas in there. So that's okay. Less than a torr or two you can pump through the diffusion pump. So we're just going to start by opening this valve and see if we pump everything down, see what it comes down to. So I'm just going to open the valve above the diffusion pump. And it definitely is pumping down better than the mechanical pump did. The Baricel reads 0 torr, and the thermocouple gauge now reads about 14 or 15 millitorr, and it's still dropping. So the diffusion pump is good at pumping that last little bit out. The mechanical pump can get to 60 millitorr, 100 millitorr, 300 millitorr, depends on how good the pump is and what the oil condition is. So we're almost done setting the line up. The last step is to put the trap under liquid nitrogen. The reason you do that is if you handle gases on this part of the line that you don't want to get into the pumps, for instance butane, which is flammable among other things, you could trap it down in here and prevent it from getting in the pumps. So the way we trap it down is we use liquid nitrogen. Many of you are familiar with liquid nitrogen. It's the liquefied major component of the atmosphere. It's at about 77 Kelvin, so it's very cold. I've got some in this dewar. This dewar I have is empty. This is the one I'm going to use on the trap, and I'm going to pour it from this. So this goes on here, and there's a chain to hold it in place. It's important that you get it on tight. So what I'm doing, you probably can't see because I'm in the way, is there's a cable chain that goes around the dewar to hold it to this clamp system. So now I'm going to tighten it. This takes a little while. It's a threaded tighten. It's not easy to adjust. It takes time. So if things are adjusted right, this dewar won't be touching the glass of the trap. And what we're going to do is pour liquid nitrogen there. I recommend that when you guys are doing this, you use some kind of insulated glove. I usually don't. I've got old scarred hands and a few more frostbite burns on them. Don't matter, but you probably don't want to risk it. So if you've never handled liquid nitrogen before, you'll get the chance in class, but it looks like water, and it's about as expensive as really, really cheap beer. And so we use it as a coolant. So I'm pouring until it started to spit a little bit, and I'm going to let it spit for a little bit just to have to cool all of this stuff off. Pouring the liquid nitrogen in already brought the pressure down another bit to about 5 millitorn. Probably it'll drop farther as I further get more liquid nitrogen in here. Stop it spitting again. And it sometimes helps to rotate this so that you pour over a part that's not an edge that's not cold. You usually get a easier pour. And we'll basically stop filling it once the liquid nitrogen is almost up to the top. And I can see it through the glass of the trap. Okay, so that's good. We'll just store the remaining part over here out of the way of us. So we now have properly started up our vacuum line. And if you trace the pumping path, we go from the mechanical pump through this valve to the diffusion pump, up this way, over this way, down through the trap, then up over this way. So gas is flowing from this part of the vacuum line, back through the trap, down through the diffusion pump, and then to the mechanical pump. When we have really high pressures in the line, what we will do is close this valve. If we need to pump it out, we'll close this valve on the diffusion pump and close the backside valve on the diffusion pump. So now the diffusion pump is isolated, and then we will open this valve. If I do that, you can't see it, but the pressure in the line actually goes up a little bit because the neck pump's not as good as the diffusion pump. Not very much because of the liquid nitrogen trap. I'm going to close this again. So we pumped away our high pressure gas. Then you open the back side of the diffusion pump. Make sure it's pumped out again. And then you can open this, and that'll pump your line down the rest of the way. So that is a properly running vacuum line. One of the things you're going to have to do is evacuate a bulb like this, which you should be handling with gloves. I'm not, just in the interest of time. And if you put it on one of the joints here, we've got atmosphere in here. That's a small volume. That's okay to pump directly through the diffusion pump. So you just open the valve. And let it pump out. And the pressure went up to a few hundred millitorr. But it's coming down rapidly. It's down to 19 already. The bulb itself may have something in it. That's a little bigger volume, so we're a little worried about that. So that's one that you will go through the process of saying, we better shut off the diffusion pump. Or not shut it off, but isolate the diffusion pump. Through the mechanical pump. So open this valve again. Then we can open the valve on the bulb. As it turns out, the bulb didn't have anything in it, so that wasn't a necessary precaution, but we're still being careful. So we reverse the process here, open the downstream valve first, the one closest to the neck pump, then this one. And then we pump this out as long as you need to. Now, I'm not interested in doing that right now, so I'm just going to close this valve here. Get a wet seal, then close this valve here till I get a wet seal. And then to take these off, these are nice round balls, so if you just twist it, it will release the vacuum and it comes out off cleanly without any forcing. So, how do you shut a vacuum line down properly? Well, you pretty much reverse the process. You make sure that the part of the vacuum line that you work in, the manifold, is all pumped down, so everything's cleaned out. And then we shut off the pressure gauges, valves, just to make sure that they don't get contaminated, or if they're leaking, they don't leak into the main line. Make sure all your valves are really closed here. This one's open, so we're going to close that. So now the manifold is isolated. Now we're ready to start going through the shutdown process. Now, we've got liquid nitrogen in here. Oxygen at atmospheric pressure condenses at liquid nitrogen temperature. And if you mix oxygen with organics, you get an explosion. So we can't open this to atmosphere with the liquid nitrogen out of the trap. But if you've got things trapped in here, you also have the risk that as soon as you take the liquid nitrogen off, things will vaporize and you have a pressurized system and it could explode on you. I'm not wearing goggles, but you must wear goggles during this because the line, it is possible for the glass line to break, implode, or explode, and then it sends glass going everywhere. So, how do we do this? What we do is we drop the liquid nitrogen off quickly and open the valve. Now, we don't want to expose the diffusion pump to atmosphere, so we need to make sure that all the valves on either side of the trap are closed. So this valve is closed, this valve is closed, this valve is closed, this valve is closed. So this is now completely isolated. The diffusion pump is still being pumped on by the neck pump, which is fine. We'll worry about shutting down the pumps after we deal with the liquid nitrogen trap. So now what we need to do is drop this off. It's not quite as dangerous as you think it is because this spring-loaded clamp here, if you start to build up pressure, this seal will release. But we're going to try to release this quickly so that there isn't a problem. So, undo the cable holding this. Quickly drop this off, and as soon as you get the trap off, the liquid nitrogen off, you open this valve. Notice we get condensation in there because it's so cold, but it's not liquid nitrogen temperature, so we don't get oxygen. So that part is now fine. So, next thing we need to do is shut down the rest of the vacuum line. And the way we do that is we simply turn off power to the diffusion pump and we leave it pumping for about 20 minutes till it's cool. Once it's cool, we'll shut off the back valve and turn off the neck pump. The neck pump, one of the issues with the neck pump, and I'll actually show you this, even though I'm not going to show you shutting down the diffusion pump. Assume the diffusion pump are cool, so this valve back here gets closed. How do we shut down the neck pump? Well, the problem is the neck pump has oil in it. If you just leave it hooked to vacuum, the oil gets sucked back up into the vacuum line. We don't want to do that. So you open this valve, and then you start opening the valve that bypasses the diffusion pump. And you'll hear the pump start to make a lot of noise. And then you can shut off the pump, and when it stops sucking air in, you reclose this valve. Okay? So that's the final shutdown of the vacuum. So the startup of the vacuum line will be done before you get into class so that you don't have to spend the time on it.